Are you afraid of the dark? If not, you probably were as a child. Go on, admit it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a fear we all share, buried deep in our bones. The terror of night claws at us, a primal instinct for survival. Even when there's no danger, even when we know that we're safe, we still jump at the slightest creak, the faintest whisper, and pull the covers over our heads, hoping whatever hides in the shadows won't see us. Yes, many fear the dark. Perhaps you are one of them. But have you ever wondered if that fear is misplaced? Let me share a secret with you. It's not the dark you should be afraid of. No, the real terror waits for you in the daylight. You may laugh, thinking this is nonsense, but stay with me for just a moment and I'll show you why. But first, a warning. This isn't my story. What I'm about to tell you didn't happen to me, but to someone I loved, someone who's no longer here to tell their tale. His name was David, and I was there to witness much of what happened. He can't speak for himself anymore, so I must tell you what I saw, what I know. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone else can avoid his fate. Now let's begin. David and I had been friends since kindergarten. Like many kids, David was terrified of the dark. He slept with a nightlight and swore that shadows moved in his closet, that something vile breathed under his bed. He heard whispers at night, he said. Though he never saw anything, he felt them just out of reach, watching, waiting. No one believed him, of course. Everyone thought it was just the wild imagination of a child, but he never really outgrew it. Sure, by the 4th grade, David stopped talking about ghosts and monsters, and the nightlight was packed away. But when the sun set, something changed in him. His eyes would dart around the room, wide and panicked, as if he were searching for something none of us could see. The real trouble started in the fall of 2015, during our 2nd year of college. David had just moved out of his parents' house and into a cramped apartment with his girlfriend, Savannah. For a while, they seemed happy, but then, something shifted. One chilly October morning, Savannah called me. Her voice trembled. "Something's wrong with David," she whispered. "What do you mean?" I asked, already feeling that creeping dread. She explained that David had been acting strange, really strange. Whenever he was alone in the apartment, he'd close the blinds and sit in total darkness. Given his lifelong fear of the dark, it was more than strange, it was disturbing. "You're his best friend, Amber," Savannah pleaded. "What's going on with him? What should I do?" I didn't have an answer. I bit my lip, unsure of what to say. "Have you tried talking to him?" "Of course," she said, frustrated. "But he denies anything is wrong." At first, I thought it was just stress. You know, with school, work, and the move. But now, I think it's something else, something worse. I tried to reassure her. "He's probably just overwhelmed. There's gotta be a logical explanation." But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. Something wasn't right. And what happened next, well, I still can't explain it. But it was real. Real enough to steal David away forever. "Thanks, Amber," she muttered, followed by a muffled curse. "I'm late for class. I'll talk to you later." Then, just like that, she hung up. I was late too, so I grabbed my things and bolted out of my apartment, where I lived with 3 other girls. I floored it for the 5-minute drive to campus. Halfway there, I texted David, asking if he wanted to meet for lunch at our usual spot. When he agreed, I was relieved until I saw him. It had only been 4 days since I'd last seen him in person, but when I laid eyes on him, I was shocked. He looked wrong. Sickly pale, his once bright green eyes were dull and sunken, framed by deep dark circles. His hair was a mess, and his entire body seemed to vibrate, like something unseen was crawling beneath his skin, desperate to escape. "Hey, Amber," he stammered, forcing a grin that looked more like a grimace. "How've you been?" "David, you look awful." I've never been one to mince words, especially not with him. "I know," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I haven't been sleeping. I think it's insomnia. Probably from staying up all night studying. I'm seeing a doctor this week to get some sleeping pills. We sat down, ordered our food, but I couldn't shake the knot of dread tightening in my gut. David, Savannah's worried about you. She says something's wrong. He waved a hand dismissively. She worries too much. Don't get me wrong, I love her, but she needs to chill a little. David, I leaned in, lowering my voice. Something is wrong. You can tell me you know that. I'm always here for you. He sighed, his hands scrubbing at his face like he was trying to wipe away whatever was haunting him. Promise you won't laugh. Or call me crazy. I guess that depends on what you tell me, I said, trying to lighten the mood. But when I saw the fear in his eyes, I knew this wasn't a joke. Okay, I'll try. David let out a deep breath and leaned in close, his eyes locking with mine. Something's haunting me. Normally, I would have laughed, maybe teased him a bit. But not this time. There was something about the way he said it, like he was confessing a sin. It made my skin crawl. What do you mean? I asked, my throat tight. He took a sip of water, staring at the glass like it held answers. It's only during the day, when there's light. Whatever this thing is, it can't seem to find me in the dark. I'm safe at night, but during the day. He trailed off, glancing nervously over his shoulder. It's always there. I don't see it, but I know it's here. The waitress arrived with our food, but I'd lost my appetite. David, are you on something? I asked, trying to sound casual. He'd dabbled with pot in high school, but this felt different, darker. He shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. No, Amber, this is real. Something is after me. And the weirdest part? The dark, the thing I've been afraid of my whole life? Now it's the only place I feel safe. A cold shiver ran down my spine, like 1,000 spiders crawling under my skin. Is it here now? He glanced around, his gaze frantic. I don't see it, but it's here. I know it is. My stomach churned. His words, his tone, there was something so unhinged about it. David, you need help. This isn't normal. I'm not insane, Amber, he said, though the wild look in his eyes told a different story. I know how this sounds, but it's real. I'm not losing my mind, but I wasn't so sure. Terrified for him, I made an appointment for him with the campus counselor. He went to his doctor too, and was prescribed sleeping pills and anti-anxiety meds. For a while, it seemed like things were getting better. His color returned, and he seemed calmer, but it was only a temporary reprieve. In January, it all went to hell again. We went out to a club for New Year's. David had a few drinks, laughing, trying to shake off the last remnants of his paranoia. But as the night wore on, the shadows under the neon lights seemed to close in around him, and then it happened. He froze, eyes wide, staring into the bright lights like they were a death sentence. And that's when I knew. Whatever had been haunting him wasn't done yet. I'll admit it, I'm a heavy drinker. My memory of that night might not be perfect, but I remember enough. We were at a club with a bunch of friends. The place was decked out for a disco night, flashing bright, multicolored lights across the dance floor. We were having the time of our lives, laughing and dancing, when David started screaming. The sound still echoes in my head, even now. It cut through the music, drowning out everything else. Everyone stopped. The crowd froze, eyes wide, as the bouncers rushed toward David, thinking he'd lost his mind. They tossed him out like some dangerous lunatic. And the rest of us? We followed, too shocked to do anything but watch as he stumbled into a dark alley. I'll never forget the sight. David, slamming his head against the cold, hard brick wall, blood streaking down his face. He was shrieking, "It's back! It's coming for me! It's coming for me!" Over and over, like a broken record. We managed to calm him down enough to get him into the car and rush him to the hospital. He needed stitches for the gash in his forehead. They admitted him to the psych ward that night, and there he stayed for weeks. The doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia, upped his medication, and tried to talk him down from the madness. In therapy, he wouldn't stop talking about the thing that haunted him. An entity with glowing red eyes, a twisted, hideous face, lurking just at the edges of his vision. And it thrived in the light. He told them the things that used to scare him as a child. The shadows, the monsters under the bed, they weren't his enemies. They were his protectors. He drew pictures of the creature, but he begged the staff to destroy them before anyone could see. Savannah saw them though. She wouldn't tell me what they looked like, only that. If there's a hell, that's where those things come from. Eventually, the doctors got David stable enough to go home. They gave him antipsychotics and strict orders to see a psychiatrist regularly. For a while, things seemed to settle. His color came back, and he even laughed again. But I should have known it wouldn't last. The real nightmare was only beginning. David started to change more than before. He insisted on keeping every light in his apartment off, covering the windows with newspapers, sealing himself in darkness. Any hint of light, and he'd fly into a panic, screaming about how it would find him. Savannah couldn't handle it. She left, moved out for good. From then on, I saw less and less of David. He stopped answering my calls, stopped going to class. His grades tanked, and I started to fear the worst. Then, one day in March, David stopped showing up altogether. The police were called to check on him. When they entered his apartment, they found a nightmare. The windows were sealed, the light bulbs ripped from every fixture. David was huddled in his bedroom closet, shaking and muttering about how it was coming to kill him. When the cops shined a flashlight on him, David went wild, attacking one of the officers, breaking the man's nose. They dragged him back to the psych ward, and this time, it was worse. He'd been surviving on nothing but instant coffee and his pills, and he'd wasted away to 90 pounds. A 5'10" man reduced to nothing. It was a miracle he was even alive. After being readmitted, David slipped into a catatonic state, only occasionally whispering about how his end was near, about how the thing was still hunting him. They put him on suicide watch, but it wasn't enough. On March 25, 2016, David was found dead in his room. The walls were riddled with holes, the mattress torn to shreds, blood smeared everywhere. David's body was covered in defensive wounds. He'd fought desperately, but no one had heard a thing. No screams, no struggle. The autopsy was inconclusive, and to this day, David's death remains an open case. No answers. Just more questions. His death shattered me. Not just because I lost my best friend, but because of how he died. Terrified, alone, fighting something no one else could see. And I believe it was real. Whatever killed David wasn't a delusion. It was something else. Something sinister. Maybe I'm crazy for thinking that, but I saw the fear in his eyes. I watched him deteriorate. I know there's a truth out there, lurking just beyond the light. But I don't know where to look, and that's what haunts me. I want people to understand that David wasn't just some crazy guy. He didn't die because of his mind. He was killed by something far worse. Now I sleep with my blinds drawn, doors locked, blocking out any trace of light. I take long walks at night, feeling safest when the moon is high. After all, it's not the dark you should fear. It's the blinding light of day that brings out the real monsters.